They called it the Dead Forest. Not as a nickname, as a fact. Nothing grew there anymore. The trees stood like gray skeletons, stripped of leaves, choked by a thick carpet of dry, tangled brush that had strangled the ground for decades. No birds. No insects worth mentioning. The soil underneath was so hard and so dead that rain didn't even soak in. It just ran off the surface like water off concrete and disappeared. Every expert who looked at it said the same thing. This land is gone. Bring in bulldozers, clear it, start over, or just walk away. And then a small team of scientists did something that sounded completely insane. They didn't bring machines. They didn't bring chemicals. They didn't bring an army of workers. They brought 500 goats. They sealed them inside the dead forest behind a single fence. And then they walked away and waited. The local ranchers laughed. The other scientists shook their heads. Goats destroy land. Everyone knows that. Goats are how you turn green hills into deserts, not the other way around. People were already calling it a waste of money and a slow-motion disaster. 1 year later, they opened the gate, and what they walked into was so different, so impossible, that one of the researchers said she didn't recognize the place she had stood in 12 months earlier. The dead forest wasn't dead anymore. To understand how 500 goats did what no machine and no expert could do, you have to understand how this forest died in the first place. Because the truth is, the goats didn't bring something new to that land. They brought back something that had been missing for a very, very long time. A forest that strangled itself. Here's the part nobody expects. This forest didn't die from too little life. It died from the wrong kind of life. Too much of it all at once, with nothing to keep it in balance. Go back far enough, and this was healthy land. Open woodland, grass between the trees, wildflowers in spring. And animals, lots of them, moving through constantly. Deer, wild goats, grazing herds that wandered in, ate the brush down, churned the soil with their hooves, dropped their manure, and moved on. For thousands of years, those animals were the gardeners of that forest, even though nobody thought of them that way. Then, over the last century, the animals disappeared, hunted out, fenced out, pushed away as people moved in and then moved on. And the moment the grazers vanished, something began to go wrong that nobody noticed until it was too late. Without anything eating it, the underbrush exploded. Thorny shrubs, invasive weeds, and dry, tangled scrub grew thicker every single year. It climbed up the trees. It blocked the sunlight from reaching the ground. It smothered the grass and the wildflowers until they vanished completely, and it built up into a dense, dry, dead mat. Layers and layers of it, packed so tight that no seed could push through and no rain could get in. That dry brush did 3 deadly things. First, it sealed the soil. Rain hit the tangled mat and ran straight off, so the ground beneath slowly dried into something like hardpan, cracked, lifeless, almost like baked clay. Second, it starved the trees. The big old trees, robbed of water and surrounded by competition, weakened year after year until they stood there barely alive. And third, this is the dangerous one. It became fuel. A forest packed wall to wall with dry, dead brush is not a forest anymore. It's a bomb waiting for a single spark. So the dead forest wasn't really dead. It was suffocating. It was buried alive under decades of overgrowth that had no natural predator. The grass was still down there, somewhere in the seed bank in the soil. The life was still there, locked away. It just had no way to get out. And that was the problem the scientists were actually trying to solve. They didn't want to clear the forest. Clearing it with machines would tear up what little soil was left, and the brush would just grow back twice as fast. They wanted to unlock it. They wanted to bring back the one thing that had kept this land alive for thousands of years before humans removed it. A natural force with an appetite. That's where the goats come in. And before you think goats wreck land, let me show you why that's only half the story, and why the other half changes everything. Yes, goats can destroy land, but here's the secret almost nobody understands. It's not the goat that destroys land, it's how the goat is managed. A few goats left in one small spot forever will strip it to bare dirt. That's the picture everyone has in their head. But that's not what these scientists did. They used a method built on one simple idea borrowed straight from nature. A large herd in a tight group for a short time, then gone. Think about how wild herds actually behave. Out in the wild, prey animals like goats and deer don't spread out lazily and nibble one favorite plant down to nothing. They bunch together tightly for protection from predators. They eat everything in front of them fast. The good and the bad, the brush, the weeds, the thorns. They trample what they don't eat. They fertilize the ground as they go. And then, because predators are always near and the food in that spot is gone, they move on. And they don't come back for a long time. That eat hard, move on, stay away rhythm is the exact pattern that built healthy grasslands and open forests all over the planet. These scientists were copying that pattern on purpose. The fence kept the 500 goats packed into one section of the dead forest at a time, forcing them to behave like a wild herd under pressure. They had to eat the nasty stuff. The thorny brush, the invasive weeds, the dry, tangled scrub that nothing else would touch. And there were enough of them that they hit it hard and fast instead of picking at it gently for years. If this is the kind of story that flips everything you thought you knew on its head, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We dig into the discoveries that quietly rewrite the rules, the ones most people never hear about. There's a lot more coming. Now back to the dead forest and what those goats actually did the first 3 months. At first, it looked exactly like the disaster everyone predicted. The goats tore into the brush, they ate the lower leaves off the dead-looking trees, they trampled the dry mat into the dirt. To anyone walking past, it looked like 500 animals chewing a sick forest down to nothing. But the scientists weren't watching the brush disappear. They were watching what the disappearing brush revealed. For the first time in decades, sunlight hit the forest floor. The thick canopy of overgrowth that had sealed the ground was being ripped open, day by day, mouthful by mouthful. And as the goats moved through, their sharp hooves did something no rake or bulldozer could do gently enough. They broke up the hard crust on the soil. Not torn apart, just cracked open, churned, loosened. Tiny dents and pockets everywhere. And then there was what the goats left behind. 500 animals eating all day produce an enormous amount of manure, and that manure is pure fuel for dead soil. It's packed with nutrients. It's packed with the gut bacteria and microbes that dead ground had been missing for decades. And this is the clever part. It's packed with seeds. Goats eat seeds from dozens of plants and pass them out again, dropped into a ready-made pile of fertilizer, pressed into freshly broken soil by a passing hoof. Every patch of ground the herd crossed was being cracked open, watered with nitrogen, and planted, all at the same time, by accident, just by the animals being animals. By the end of the 3rd month, the scientists moved the herd to the next section and let the first one rest. And that resting period was the whole point. Because now, for the first time in years, the piece of ground had everything it needed. Open sunlight, broken soil, fresh fertilizer, and seeds pressed into the dirt. All it needed now was a little rain and some time. The land remembers. Then the rain came, and this time, the ground didn't shrug it off. The hard-sealed crust was gone, cracked open by thousands of hooves, so instead of running off the surface and vanishing, the rain soaked in. It pooled in the tiny dents the goats had pressed into the dirt. It sank down to the seeds and the roots that had been waiting, dormant, locked in the soil for years. And the forest woke up. First came a faint green haze across the bare ground. Grass, the grass that everyone assumed was long dead, sprouting from a seed bank that had been buried and starved under the brush for decades. It hadn't died. It had been waiting. Then came the wildflowers, in colors nobody had seen on that land in a generation. Then the old trees, suddenly free of the brush choking their roots and finally getting water again, began pushing out new leaves. And once the plants came back, everything else followed, fast. Insects arrived to the new flowers. Birds arrived to eat the insects. Small mammals moved into the new grass and cover. Each new layer of life pulled in the next, like a switch being flipped back on after decades in the dark. A year after they sealed those 500 goats inside the dead forest, the scientists opened the gate and walked back in. The gray skeleton forest, choked in dry brush, was gone. In its place, open ground covered in living grass, wildflowers between the trees, birdsong in the canopy, soft soil underfoot that actually held water. The same land, 12 months apart, unrecognizable. One of the researchers later said the strangest part wasn't that it worked, it was how little they had actually done. They didn't plant the grass, it was already there. They didn't fertilize the soil, the goats did. They didn't break up the hard ground or spread the seeds or bring back the insects and birds. They just brought back the missing piece, the herd, and let nature do everything else exactly the way it had done for thousands of years before people interrupted it. The reckoning nobody saw coming. Now here's where this story stops being about one forest and starts being about something much bigger, because that dead forest wasn't special. There are dead forests like it in dying grasslands and hardening deserts all over the world. Millions of acres of land slowly suffocating for the exact same reason. We removed the animals, we removed the grazers and the herds and the natural movement that kept the land in balance, and then we watched the land break down and assumed there was nothing we could do but pour in machines, chemicals, and money. And for decades, that's exactly what we did. Bulldozers, herbicides, replanting programs that drained the water table dry. Billions spent fighting the symptoms while the real problem, the missing animals, went ignored because the answer seemed too simple to be true. This is the uncomfortable question the dead forest forces us to ask. How much of the land we've written off as dead isn't dead at all? Just waiting? How many places that we're spending fortunes trying to fix with technology could be healed instead by bringing back the living engineers we removed in the first place? The grazers, the herds, the animals that were gardening these landscapes for thousands of years before we decided we knew better. Not every piece of land can be fixed this way, and done carelessly, the same animals really can cause damage. That's real, and it matters. The difference is everything. A herd managed to mimic nature heals. A herd left to sit and strip destroys. The tool was never the problem. The way we used it was... But the lesson underneath it all is hard to argue with. We spent the modern age trying to engineer nature from the outside, to control it, clear it, replace it with our own designs. And all the while, nature had already solved the problem millions of years ago. We just removed the solution, forgot it ever existed, and then spent fortunes trying to reinvent it. 500 goats, one fence, 1 year. And a forest that everyone had given up on came roaring back to life. Not because of what the scientists added, but because of what they finally gave back. So here's what I want to know from you. If a piece of land you'd completely written off as dead could be brought back just by returning the animals we removed, what species would you bring back, and where? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this one rewired the way you see the natural world, wait until you see what happened when researchers released a herd of wild horses into a desert that was eating entire cities alive. That video's next. Click it before the brush grows back.